The convergence of digitalization and energy sustainability have the winds of change blowing from these two different directions, coalescing into the perfect transformative storm all within our dynamic global economy. Digitalization and energy sustainability are two of the most powerful market influences in today's corporate landscape, but the intersection of these trends remains largely unexplored territory. So what happens when the promise of digitalization, big data, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and more meets the Green New Deal? The digitalization energy sustainability convergence in business and society offers opportunities and challenges, but what are they exactly? Find out on Emir Phillips' American Pragmatist.
Ignoring all of the remedies, believing all of the rumors, with their endless database. I wanna sit with my enemies and say we should have done this sooner, while I look them in the face. Maybe that will crack the case.
Hi, Emir Phillips, the American Pragmatist. I'm here with my neighbor, Jamie Brandt in Bentonville, Arkansas. And this time, Jamie, let's start with you, since we've done a podcast on rare metals and a separate podcast on rare earth elements. What commonality, if any, do you see between the two?
Most surprising to me is how these metals and earth elements have become indispensable to new information and communication technologies for the semiconducting properties that regulate the flow of electricity in digital devices. I've never for the life of me thought these once distinct functions of green and digital technologies were converging technology institutionally and therefore economically and politically.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you were paying attention on the podcast. That was pretty good. And it's all true what you're saying. What we have here is a unique technological advance that affects us socioeconomically in profound ways, wholly unexpected. For example, already increasingly sophisticated software and algorithms used in smart grids make it possible to regulate fluctuations in the flow of electricity between street lights, which will not only save large amounts of electricity, but means our cities at night will be darker and less actually being used, so more efficient.
Seems a better combination of the natural and artificial than we have now.
We have carved out a multitude of applications in two fundamental areas of the energy transition, supposedly green technologies and digital technologies. Both are necessary.
Back to what I learned, the first example of this convergence, wind turbines, solar panels, and electric cars. They're packed with rare metals to produce decarbonized energy that travels through high-performance electricity grids to enable power savings. Yet, these grids they're also driven by digital technology that is heavily dependent on these same rare metals.
The digitalization of the economy, I guarantee you, will drastically reduce our physical footprint on the living world.
I don't think we ever covered this when the convergence began being discussed in the media, so I ask when?
This energy transition traces its beginnings to Germany in the 1980s and culminated in Paris in 2015 when 195 nations jointly agreed to accelerate this formidable journey we're talking about, the green convergence. Their goal was to keep the increase in global warming to below 2 degrees by the end of this century, mainly by replacing fossil fuels with green energy. The 196 delegates in Le Bourget that day signed the Paris Agreement and committed to this Herculean task without considering a few crucial questions, such as where and how are we going to procure the rare metals, without which this treaty will fail. It will definitely fail. Will there be winners and losers on the new chessboard of rare metals, as there were for coal and oil for the last century and a half? And what will be the economic, social, environmental costs of securing their supply? These are critical socioeconomic questions.
Yeah, Amir, that's true. I mean, despite all that we've heard about the Paris Accord, I mean, personally, I've never heard any of these questions discussed or even mentioned.
Moreover, We get schooled every day by the media that these green technologies are gradually converging with digital technologies, thanks to which green technology will be 10 times more effective. But this raises the legitimate question of whether these technologies will in turn make green tech pollution worse.
Well, that's certainly not what any of the proponents of energy transition extol. Digital technologies, they tell us, aren't they in fact going to moderate our energy consumption?
In sum, this is their gospel. First, digital technologies form the basis of smart electrical grids, which are designed to optimize our energy consumption. Between solar panels that generate clean energy and zero-emission cars that use energy without polluting, there needs to be grids to supply energy. With the standard grid, the electricity generated by coal-fired, oil-fired, and nuclear power plants feeds continuously into the grid. Because we determine output, we know almost exactly how much energy passes at any given time at any given point in the electrical grid. But there is absolutely nothing of the sort with the current energy transition, which draws on what is known as intermittent energy sources, specifically wind and solar.
Yeah, and that word, the intermittent, isn't that because we haven't yet figured out how to wield the power of the sun and the wind? I mean, we're not gods. The power supplied to the grid by the solar panels and the wind turbines is sporadic.
This is precisely why grid operators are faced with the task of directing the right amount of electricity to the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and if there's not enough electricity supply, the supply comes to a standstill.
And if there's too much electricity, the surplus is wasted. And most people don't know that. Energy operators are therefore delighted by the prospect of a new generation of electric grids that can constantly and dynamically manage supply in response to actual demand, thereby reducing energy wastage using increasingly sophisticated algorithms, which is where AI, the digital convergence, comes in.
Yeah, and we've had two other podcasts recently that implied to me that the digital technology supposedly mitigates the carbon impact of human activities, as lauded by the invigoratingly optimistic media channels. They seem to incessantly postulate that crossover of digital technologies and green energy, they're going to allow everyone to produce their own clean and expensive and abundant energy.
This is sometimes referred to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab, which also deemed the new zero marginal cost society. It's another term of art used instead of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And it means that by creating a new generation of collaborative commons, everything in society is shared and exchanged online. Internet technologies will pitch us into the age of access that will negate any need for private ownership.
Yeah, I've heard about this, that we will own nothing, that we will be happy. I watched WALL-E, and I saw all these fat people watching things. That's entertainment. But we're just going to watch the internet, surf the internet. We're going to buy things. We'll have the freedom to share any product in exchange for money.
Already, we're seeing the beginnings of this cultural revolution in car transport. Uber, Lyft, car to go get, it's just a few. The consequences could be grave for the automotive industry. Already, supposedly 80% of car sharing website users have already sold their car. Just think of the plummeting number of cars in this new age of access.
Okay, age of access. Is there any think tank affiliated with this age of access?
Not a think tank per se, but in 2013, Eric Schmidt, the then chair of Google's board of directors, and Jared Cohen, a former advisor to Hillary Clinton in the U.S. State Department and the self-appointed father of, quote, digital diplomacy, took the rationale of this age of access a step further in the publication of their book, The New Digital Age. Courtesy of the internet, the two gurus explained, and I quote, "The vast majority of us will increasingly find ourselves living, working, and being governed in two worlds at once, the physical world and the virtual world," end quote.
Yeah, but in this quasi-utopia, I mean, shouldn't we be worried about the cyber warfare? I mean, that's like the devil himself.
They do in fact predict that in the future there will be more and more cyber states declaring more cyber wars against virtual criminal networks that perpetuate increasingly powerful cyber attacks.
Okay, but when do we get to nirvana?
To a certain degree, this utopia of a dematerialized world is here already, here now. Already, dematerialization is synonymous with working from home, e-commerce, electric documentation, digital data storage, and more. By limiting the physical transportation of information and migrating from paper to digital, we can disavow our resource-guzzling civilization, and while we're at it, slow down the deforestation of the Amazon and the Congo Basin. Critically, the Green New Deal and the virtual world from digitization or e-verse need each other, absolutely need each other, need integration to succeed.
Yeah, every iteration of this same heaven on earth story, it needs something to trigger the transformation into the new age. So for us, what is it here?
Rare metals and rare earth elements. Digital technology requires vast quantities of metals. Every year, the electronics industry consumes 320 tons of gold and 7,500 tons of silver, accounts for 22%, 514 tons of global mercury consumption, and up to 2.5% of lead consumption. The manufacture of laptops and mobile phones alone swallows up to 19% of the global production of rare metals, such as palladium, and 23% of cobalt. This excludes the other 40 or so metals on average contained in your cell phone. And yet, the product in the hands of the consumer only makes up 2% of the total waste generated over the course of the product's life cycle.
And like on every episode of this podcast, I have to identify, is this the dark side of the technology?
Definitely. We do focus, as always, the dark side, apparently so. And yeah, definitely. One example says it all. The manufacture of just one 2-gram chip produces 2 kilograms of waste, a ratio between the end product and the resulting waste of 1 to 1,000. And this is only the manufacture of digital devices. Operating electric grids will, of course, generate additional digital activity and therefore additional pollution, the effects of which are becoming clearer and clearer. A documentary investigating the environmental impact of the internet traces the journey of a simple single email. Once your email leaves the computer, it reaches the modem, travels down the building to a connection center, transits from an individual cable to national and international exchanges, and then goes through a message host, usually in the US. In the data centers of Google, Microsoft, and Facebook, the email is then processed, stored, and sent to its recipient. All told, your single email travels 15,000 kilometers at the speed of light, all of this has an environmental cost. Nothing is free.
Yeah, and like every other issue on the American Pragmatist, when you look at the entire process of a thing, of an industry or whatever it is you're trying to compare, you expose a lot of things. Like in this case, you've actually exposed that there's no such thing as something being virtual. It's all connected.
Far from it. The DME, which is an acronym for the Agency for Environmental and Energy Management, which calculated the electrical cost of our digital activities. An email with an attachment uses as much electricity as a high wattage energy saving light bulb for 1 hour. Every hour, some 10 billion emails are sent around the world. That's 50 gigawatts, or the equivalent output of 15 nuclear power plant stations running for 1 hour. One data center alone uses as much energy as a city of 30,000 inhabitants to manage the flow of data and run its cooling systems. A U.S. study estimated that the information and communication tech sector consumes as much as 10% of the world's electricity and produces 50% more greenhouse gases than air transport annually, according to a Greenpeace report. Were the clouds a country, it would be the world's 5th biggest consumer of electricity.
Okay, hold on, I gotta write this down. Did the American Pragmatist just say that he's on board with Greenpeace?
This, on that one I am. They got a good quote there. I'm trying to show that the cloud is huge. The truth is the truth. They nailed it on that. And the truth is that green energy and the digital transition will requires a constellation of satellites already promised by the heavyweights of Silicon Valley to put the entire planet online, and it has an environmental cost.
I feel like a light just went off. Like you're connecting the interests of Elon Musk. This explains his affinity for rockets, since it's going to take rockets to launch these satellites into space.
And an armada of computers to set them on the right orbit to emit on the correct frequencies and encrypt communications using sophisticated digital tools. Legions of supercalculators to analyze the deluge of data, a ton of big data, and to direct this big data in real time. A planetary mesh of underwater cables, a maze of overhead and underground electrical networks, millions of computer terminals, countless data storage centers, and billions of tablets, smartphones, and other connected devices with batteries that need to be recharged.
Yeah, you've made me realize that this supposedly virtuous shift towards the age of dematerialization, which actually I would be on board with, there's nothing more than an outright ruse. I mean, for there's no end to the physical impact.
Moreover, Jamie, feeding this digital leviathan will require coal-fired, oil-fired, and nuclear power plants, wind farms, solar farms, and smart grids, all infrastructures that rely on rare metals.
And I hate being the person to always say this, and not a word from the media on this topic.
No,
right?
no, there isn't. What we got to keep forefront in our minds is that all green technology begins prosaically as a gash in the Earth's crust.
No matter how I look at this, no matter whichever perspective we take, the new demand on the planet replaces our dependence on oil and addiction to rare metals.
We are offsetting deprivation with excess, a bit like drug addicts weaning themselves off cocaine by sinking into heroin. Instead of addressing the challenge of humanity's impact on ecosystems, we're displacing it, and the rate at which we are subjugating today's environmental perils could very well have dire ecological consequences. We need to get a handle on the real issue today. Tomorrow's too late.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, the concept of own less, buy less. You don't need the latest gadget, the most expensive thing to keep up with the Joneses. Like, I'm big time on board with all of that philosophy. I love that, but that's not what's happening. That's not the heart behind it. It's not necessarily don't try to get all these things to make you happy. It's just shifting it over to a different kind of spend.
The implication, the logic is that if in the dematerialized world means a digital world, a virtual world, and because it's digital and virtual, there's no real cost involved. And that is false, flagrantly false. I've hoped this podcast has shown there's a vast electrical grid and physical infrastructure disproportionately based on rare metals, which the U.S. does not currently have access to. Most of that is unfortunately in communist China. And so there's a real cost here involved to this new world order, and whether we go forward with it or not, let's at least be able to do an analytical cost-benefit analysis by being honest on the full cycle, long-range cost involved here. And I hope the podcast is going to that effect.
Yeah, as an illustrator and designer, I appreciate the idea of digital design, digital assets, creating worlds, like world building. I love all of that. I'm fascinated by all of that. But there's an element here where your whole life is spent online, your whole life is digital. I've seen the effect even through social media, or kids not playing with toys and they're playing, Minecraft and Fortnite and all that together instead. Am I just being a little hyperbolic here and a little worried? But there's something, if your whole existence is digital and you're digital, like, you're easily dehumanized by your enemy.
Well, this podcast is focused on the physical cost of the green convergence and digitization, and you're focusing now on there is another element, a psychological, human cost, and there are real existential concerns that you've brought up. And I think we allude to it in a podcast on AI and happiness and AI and education. But, even here I can say that digitization is going to have an effect on how we perceive reality, how we think we perceive reality, and how we perceive ourselves. And is it healthy to be so dematerialized, to be so digitized? Intuitively, I can't think this is healthy. And the New World Order needs to be frank about those costs as well that you're alluding to, and very legitimately so.
Yeah, the thing I learned here today is that whatever is built in the digital world actually costs us something in the real world.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that needs to be stated honestly, clearly. We need to come up with ways to accurately quantify what you just said so we can make a good faith assessment of how we want to act in this country socioeconomically going forward in the future.
I can see a little avatar in a video game saying this line from Gladiator, the movie. What happens in this life echoes in eternity.
Yeah, it does. It reverberates. I mean, nothing's free, and there's a cost to everything. And I think we have to have that mindset, and that's where we get our sense of value from. And just because it's digitized and seems virtual, seems costless, doesn't mean it is.
Well, let me ask you one quick question about the digital assets. Do you think that as an investor, are you interested in NFTs and any of those?
Well, that's a good question. Digitization is seemingly cutting against the economic foundation of the concept of scarcity. When you can digitize something like you've alluded to, NFTs, and you can make basically ad infinitum replicas of something, what have you done to the concept of supply and demand and scarcity and economics? How do you price something that can be digitized almost ad infinitum or perhaps ad infinitum? You basically have no scarcity. You basically have infinite supply in the digitized NFT world. I do not have a clear answer on that yet. I've given it some thought, but I think you've really touched a deep nerve center that's also not discussed. So you've brought in the human psychological cost, and now you're bringing in the lack of economic cost, the lack of scarcity in the digital world. You specifically named NFTs. Very good point. I don't have, unfortunately, a very good answer to you other than to say it's real what you just said. It's affecting economics. When I teach economics, I bring that up. I bring that issue up, and I wish I had answers, and as yet I do not.
There's no doubt in my mind that there will be an NFT podcast at some point. But another aspect to this is the convenience of a digital asset, even in the world we live in right now that we've been living in for quite some time. For example, I just bought Buffalo Bills tickets. I'm not getting tickets in the mail. I have a ticket emailed to me, and it has a barcode, it has a QR code or whatever that is, and I'll go to the game. I won't even think about my ticket until I'm in line, and I'll use my cell phone data to get that pulled up real quick, and they'll scan it. And I understand that there were costs to make that happen. I had a cell phone with rare metals in it, all that, but it is super convenient. It's here to stay.
It's here to stay, but the common misconception is because when you bought the Buffalo Bills ticket, it was instantaneous and virtual. Implicitly, we sense that it's then therefore costless. When in fact, as we just said, how far an email travels, you used a lot of energy and a lot of cost on Mother Earth to get your Buffalo Bills ticket. Because yet you're right again, because of the convenience. Yeah. Institutionally, it's here to stay. But we can't prioritize how to conduct this green convergence, this digitization of the new Green Deal, if we don't have some barometer on the cost.
Yeah, and it sounds like just using honest language. Like what we created was convenience. We didn't actually make the world safer or better or cleaner.
or cleaner, and it had a cost. It had a cost. It's more convenient, but it came at a cost, and that needs to be clarified.
Yeah, all the transactions that are happening every day, whether it's an Uber ride or buying something online, like all the things that it costs to make all that happen. That's what my takeaway here is that these things impact the environment, and I wasn't told that before.
I would agree, and I hope our listeners like today's podcast, and you'll hit like or subscribe to the show. You'll seriously consider maybe perhaps buying some merchandise. And even more importantly, you'll start to add on comments to further enhance the discussion that we started, because the podcasts are just the start of a conversation that we hope and expect our viewers to enhance and maybe possibly come to other more pragmatic solutions to these socioeconomic problems. And thank you again for listening. This has been Amir Phillips, American Pragmatist.
Consumers could have led the resistance. Their choice to buy or boycott has the power to redirect the market and change its practices. They had the information. Numerous documentaries have exposed the distressing environmental and social impact of electric goods, as have countless government reports. Consumers would have needed to put pressure on manufacturers to design more ecological products, such as the repairable Fairphone, and to use their votes to pressure their governments to beef up feeble anti-obsolescence regulations. But consumers would hear nothing of it. A connected planet was better than a clean planet. That's the decision of people with their buying, not speaking. Digitalization versus green energy. They are converging, but let's be clear. When given a choice between the two, consumers always choose digitalization, and governments choose almost always green energy for the people and greater digitalization for itself. Consumers empower themselves, and nearly all governments do likewise. But there is hope. New consumer rights regulations have emerged, such as the law passed in 2015 in France that requires manufacturers to inform consumers about the availability of spare parts. In the U.S., the right to repair movement is gathering pace. It requires electric good manufacturers to allow consumers to fix their products by providing them with repair manuals, for instance. Such citizen-led initiatives to repair domestic appliances have mushroomed. Another one is the Restart Project. Since its creation in 2013, the London-based social enterprise has organized thousands of events around the world where participants learn how to repair their electric goods. And in the U.S., iFixit is an online platform with over 50,000 free tutorials on how to repair anything from mobile phones to connected cars. Digitalization should not cost us an arm and a leg, and to repair rather than replace is a worthy step as we become more abundantly a green society. You heard it here on Amir Phillips, American Pragmatist.
This has been Amir Phillips, American Pragmatist. If you like the show, please hit like or subscribe. Also, it would be awesome if you went to the website, americanpragma.com. Any support there is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.